The harsh blare of a car horn jolted Yates Norwood from his reverie as he navigated the familiar streets of Maplewood, his hometown that somehow felt both unchanged and completely foreign after 15 years away. The town where he'd grown up poor was now merely a footnote in his life story. The place he'd escaped from to build his tech empire worth billions. Yet here he was, driving his custom Aston Martin down Main Street, wondering if coming back had been a mistake. His mother's 75th birthday had finally pulled him home after years of excuses. The board meeting he'd rescheduled, the product launch he'd delegated, all to spend 2 weeks reconnecting with a place he'd worked so hard to leave behind. Yates adjusted his designer sunglasses, painfully aware of how out of place his $5,000 suit looked against the backdrop of the small town storefronts. As he pulled into his mother's driveway, the modest 2-story house looked smaller than in his memories. Martha Norwood stood on the porch, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes welling with tears at the sight of her only son. "You're really here?" she said, pulling him into a fierce hug that made him feel like a boy again. Not the 35-year-old CEO of Nortech Industries. "Of course I am," Yates replied, feeling a pang of guilt at how easily the words came when they both knew he'd missed the last 5 birthdays. "I wouldn't miss this one." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, exactly as he remembered. Martha led him to the kitchen, chattering about neighbors he barely recalled and town gossip that meant nothing to him now. He nodded politely, his mind already drifting to the emails accumulating on his phone. "The party's tomorrow evening," Martha said, placing a mug of coffee in front of him. "Nothing fancy, just close friends. Though I might have invited a few people who are dying to see how far you've come." Yates suppressed a groan. "Mom, I didn't come back to be paraded around as the local success story." "I know, dear, but you can't blame them for being curious. Not everyone leaves Maplewood and becomes a millionaire." She paused. "Harper Ross will be there." The name hit him like a physical blow. Harper Ross, his next-door neighbor growing up, his best friend through elementary and middle school, the girl who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd shared her lunch when his family couldn't afford it, who'd helped him study for the SATs that eventually won him a scholarship to MIT, the girl whose heart he'd broken when he'd left town without saying goodbye. "Harper still lives here?" he asked, aiming for casual interest, despite the sudden tightness in his chest. "Owns the bookstore on Main Street now," Martha replied, watching him carefully. "Took over when old Mr. Peterson retired. She's done wonderful things with it." Yates nodded, memories flooding back. Harper with her wild curly hair and endless energy, always with her nose in a book. Harper who'd believed in him when no one else did. Harper who'd kissed him the night before he left for college, a kiss he'd never acknowledged or returned. "She's single, you know," Martha added with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "Mom," Yates warned, "I'm just saying, she asks about you sometimes." He doubted that, not after 15 years of silence. He'd seen her name pop up occasionally on social media, but had never reached out. What would he say? "Sorry I ghosted you after 18 years of friendship? Sorry I was too focused on making my first million to return your calls?" "I should unpack," he said, standing abruptly. "Is my room still—" "Just as you left it," Martha replied with a sad smile. "Though I did wash the sheets." Upstairs, his childhood bedroom was indeed a time capsule. Debate team trophies lined the shelves. A periodic table poster still hung on the wall. His old desk sat beneath the window that had once faced Harper's bedroom window, where they'd developed an elaborate flashlight communication system as kids. Yates dropped his suitcase on the bed and moved to the window. The Ross house looked well-maintained, with fresh paint and new curtains. Was Harper living there now, or just visiting her parents like him? His phone buzzed his assistant with questions about the Singapore deal, work, reality, the life he'd built that had no place for childhood nostalgia or old regrets. He turned away from the window. The next morning, Yates woke early, habit driving him to check emails before his feet hit the floor. 3 hours of conference calls later, he finally emerged from his room to find his mother preparing for the party. "I thought you might help me pick up the cake," Martha said, clearly having waited patiently for him to finish his work. The guilt was immediate. "Of course," he said, pocketing his phone. "Let me just change into something less—" He gestured at his suit. 10 minutes later, dressed in jeans that still cost more than his mother probably spent on a month's groceries, Yates drove them to Main Street. The town's modest commercial district consisted of a few blocks of storefronts, the hardware store, the diner, the small movie theater, and, he noticed with a jolt, bookmark books. The storefront was charming, with large display windows showcasing colorful book covers and comfortable reading nooks visible inside. As Martha chatted with the baker next door, Yates found himself drawn to the bookstore, peering through the window like a teenager. And there she was. Harper Ross stood behind the counter, assisting a customer, her curly hair now cut into a stylish bob that framed her face perfectly. She wore a simple blue dress that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. She was laughing at something the customer said, and the sound carried faintly through the glass. She was beautiful, more beautiful than he remembered, with 15 years of life experience adding character to her features. The gangly teenager was now a confident woman. Before he could step away, she looked up, and their eyes met through the window. Her smile froze. Recognition dawned. 15 years collapsed into nothing. The customer left, and Harper moved slowly to the door, pushing it open. "Yates Norwood," she said, and hearing her voice again after so long made something shift inside him. The prodigal son returns. "Harper." He managed a smile that felt inadequate. "You look great." "So do you. Success seems to agree with you." There was something in her tone, not quite bitterness, but something guarded. "I hear you own this place now. Congratulations." "Thanks." She glanced past him to where Martha was exiting the bakery with a large box. "Here for your mom's birthday?" "Yeah, 2 weeks." He paused. "She mentioned you'll be at the party?" Harper nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I wouldn't miss it. Your mom's been like family to me since my parents moved to Florida." "Harper, He stopped, unsure what to say. Sorry seemed insufficient. "It's good to see you." Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, before she smiled politely. "You too. I should get back inside. See you tomorrow night." The door closed between them, and Yates stood there feeling like he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. "She's done so well with that store," Martha said, appearing at his side with the cake box. "Started a literacy program for the kids in town, hosts author events. Everyone loves her." Of course they did. Harper had always been easy to love. It was leaving her that had been hard, though he'd managed it anyway. "Yates?" His mother was watching him with knowing eyes. "Let's get this cake home," he said, taking the box from her. That evening, after another round of calls with his executive team, Yates found himself restless in the quiet house. His mother had gone to bed early, exhausted from party preparations. The walls of his childhood bedroom felt confining, the memories too close for comfort. He grabbed his keys and headed out, with no particular destination in mind. Somehow, he wasn't surprised when he found himself parking outside the Maple Tap, the town's only bar. The place was dim and half empty, with a few locals nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the ancient TV. Yates ordered a scotch, ignoring the curious glances. He'd just taken his first sip when the door opened and a group of women entered, their laughter cutting through the quiet murmur of the bar. Harper was among them, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air, her eyes bright. She spotted him immediately, hesitation crossing her face before she said something to her friends and approached his table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, and he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Can I get you something?" he offered. "I'm good." She held up a glass of wine from the server, who'd followed her over. "Girls' night, though I see you've still got your timing down perfectly." "What do you mean?" "You always had a knack for showing up just when I was trying not to think about you." The directness surprised him. "You were thinking about me?" "Hard not to when your face was plastered across the financial section of every newspaper last month. Nortec's revolutionary new software, the golden boy of Silicon Valley." She took a sip of her wine. "Congratulations, by the way. Sincerely." "Thank you." He studied her, trying to bridge the gap between the girl he'd known and the woman before him. "Harper, I owe you an apology." "For what specifically? Not saying goodbye? Not returning my calls? 15 years of radio silence?" There was no anger in her voice, just a calm curiosity that somehow made it worse. "All of it," he admitted. I was I was so focused on proving myself, on making it, that I cut ties with everything that reminded me of where I came from, including me, including you." He sighed. "It wasn't fair. You deserve better." Harper nodded slowly, accepting his apology without immediately absolving him. "So," she said after a moment, "tell me about this empire you've built." Grateful for the change in subject, Yates found himself talking about Nortec, about the early years of struggle and the eventual breakthroughs. Harper listened attentively, asking intelligent questions that reminded him she'd always been the smartest person he knew. "Enough about me," he said finally. "Tell me about the bookstore." Her face lit up as she described the community she'd built around bookmark books, the reading programs, the local author showcases. "It's not exactly a tech empire," she said with a self-deprecating smile, "but it's mine." "It's impressive," he said sincerely. "You always knew what you wanted." "Did I?" She tilted her head. "I think I just knew what mattered to me." The implication hung between them, that perhaps he had lost sight of what mattered in his pursuit of success. They were interrupted by one of Harper's friends calling her name. "Shots are here, H." Harper glanced over her shoulder. "I should get back to them," she said, standing. "It was nice talking to you, Yates." "Maybe we could continue this sometime," he found himself asking. "Before I head back to California?" She regarded him thoughtfully. "Maybe. Good night, Yates." He watched her rejoin her friends, their easy camaraderie a reminder of all he'd left behind. One of them whispered something to Harper, glancing his way, and Harper shook her head with a smile. The woman persisted, and Harper laughed, a genuine sound that carried across the bar and settled somewhere in Yates's chest. He finished his drink and left, the night air cooling his face as he walked to his car. Harper's words echoed in his mind. "I just knew what mattered to me." When was the last time he'd asked himself what truly mattered? The day of Martha's birthday party dawned bright and clear. Yates spent the morning helping his mother arrange furniture and set up the backyard for guests, work emails purposely ignored for the first time in years. "Harper's bringing her famous lemon squares," Martha mentioned casually as they set up folding chairs. "You used to love those." "I remember," Yates said, suddenly recalling summer afternoons spent in Harper's kitchen, licking batter from spoons while her mother taught them to bake. "Does she still do that thing with the extra glaze on top?" "Oh, yes," Martha beamed, clearly pleased he remembered. "Some things don't change." But many things had. As guests began arriving that evening, Yates found himself surrounded by familiar faces transformed by time. Former teachers now retired, neighbors with graying hair, classmates with wedding rings, and photos of children on their phones. He answered the inevitable questions about his success with practiced modesty, accepted congratulations, and endured the occasional dig about forgetting his roots. Through it all, his eyes kept drifting to the gate, watching for Harper. When she finally arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the backyard. She carried a tray of lemon squares in one hand and a wrapped gift in the other. She wore a simple green sundress that made her eyes look more intensely blue than he remembered. "Sorry I'm late," she called to Martha, setting down her offerings to embrace the older woman. "The store was packed today." "No worries, dear. Oh, these look delicious." Martha took the tray. "Yates was just asking if you still make them the same way." Harper's eyes found his across the yard. "Some recipes are worth keeping," she said with a small smile. The party flowed around them, creating natural moments of conversation as they helped serve food, refilled drinks, and circulated among guests. Each interaction felt like rediscovering a piece of their old rhythm, while acknowledging the new people they'd become. As the evening progressed, Yates found himself gravitating toward Harper, drawn by her easy laughter, and the way she made everyone around her feel important. It was a quality he'd forgotten she possessed: the ability to truly listen, to make connections that went beyond networking or strategic alliances. "Your mom seems happy," Harper said, as they found themselves alone by the punch bowl. "She does," Yates agreed, watching his mother surrounded by friends. "I should have come back sooner." "Yes, you should have." Harper's direct gaze held no accusation, just honesty. "But you're here now." "For 2 weeks," he reminded her. 2 weeks is better than nothing." They were interrupted by a call from Martha to blow out her candles, and everyone gathered around the birthday cake, singing enthusiastically, if not particularly tunefully. As Martha made her wish and blew out the 75 candles, with some help from the younger guests, Yates found himself standing beside Harper, their shoulders almost touching. "What do you think she wished for?" Harper whispered. "Grandchildren, probably," Yates replied with a rueful smile. "She's not subtle about it," Harper laughed. "She mentioned that to me, too." "She did what?" Yates turned to her in surprise. "Oh, yes. Apparently I'm not getting any younger either," Harper said with mock seriousness. "According to Martha, we're both wasting our prime years." "I'm so sorry," Yates groaned. "She has no filter. It's sweet, actually. She cares about both of us." As the party began to wind down, guests departing with leftover cake and warm goodbyes, Yates found himself helping Harper gather her empty lemon square tray and container. "These were as good as I remembered," he told her, picking up a few stray crumbs with his finger. "High praise from a man who probably dines at Michelin star restaurants regularly." "Not as often as you'd think. Usually it's takeout at my desk." Harper looked genuinely surprised. "The great Yates Norwood doesn't have time for proper meals?" "The great Yates Norwood barely has time to sleep," he admitted. "The empire requires constant attention." She studied him for a moment. "Sounds lonely." The observation, delivered without judgment, hit closer to home than he wanted to admit. "It's the price of success," he said with a shrug that felt unconvincing even to himself. "Is it worth it?" Before he could answer, Martha called from inside the house, asking for help with something. Yates excused himself, the question lingering uncomfortably in his mind. When he returned to the yard, Harper was saying goodbye to the last remaining guests. She turned to him with a smile. "I should get going too." "Let me walk you home," he offered, remembering that she lived close by. "I drove, actually." "The house is my parents' rental property now. I have an apartment above the bookstore. I'll walk you to your car then." They moved through the yard to the street where her modest Honda was parked. The night air was cool, filled with the scent of his mother's roses and the distant sound of crickets. "Thank you for coming tonight," Yates said, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye. "It meant a lot to my mom. I would never miss it." Harper unlocked her car but made no move to get in. "It was good seeing you, Yates, really. Would you—" He hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow, catch up properly, and without half the town listening in?" Harper considered him, her expression unreadable in the dim light from the street lamps. "Dinner," she repeated. As in, I'd like to spend some time with my oldest friend," he said carefully. "If she's willing." A slow smile spread across Harper's face. "Okay, dinner, but I choose the place. Deal. Pick me up at the bookstore, 7 o'clock. She got into her car, rolling down the window. "And Yates, don't wear a suit." As he watched her drive away, Yates felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with business deals or product launches. Just the simple pleasure of looking forward to tomorrow. The next morning, Yates woke to the smell of pancakes. Downstairs, his mother was humming as she flipped perfectly golden circles onto a plate. "You're up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee. "I always make pancakes the morning after my birthday," she replied. Tradition. Tradition. The word settled uncomfortably. How many of these traditions had he missed over the years? How many moments that made up the fabric of his mother's life had passed without his presence? "I'm having dinner with Harper tonight," he said, accepting a plate stacked with pancakes. Martha's eyebrows shot up. "Are you now?" "It's not what you're thinking," he said quickly. "We're just catching up." "Of course," Martha replied, not bothering to hide her smile. "Just catching up. Mom." "I didn't say anything." She busied herself with the syrup. "Though I will say, you two always made sense together. We were kids. And now you're adults. Sometimes the right people meet at the wrong time." She patted his hand. "Sometimes they get a second chance." Yates chose to focus on his pancakes rather than respond. A second chance? He wasn't even sure what he wanted from this dinner with Harper. Closure, perhaps, forgiveness, or maybe just a chance to see who they had become, without the weight of their past hanging between them. After breakfast, he claimed a work emergency and retreated to his room for several hours of actual work. The Singapore deal was at a critical stage, and his CFO needed guidance on the acquisition strategy. By the time he emerged, it was mid-afternoon, and his mother was gardening in the backyard. "I think I'll take a walk around town," he told her. "See what's changed." "Everything and nothing," Martha replied cryptically. "Take your time." Maplewood's Central Park was largely as he remembered it. Green lawns, ancient oak trees, the gazebo where high school bands played summer concerts. The playground equipment had been updated, and there were more benches, but the essence remained. Yates found himself following the path to the small pond where he and Harper had spent countless hours skipping stones and planning their futures. Her dreams had been modest by his standards. College, travel, perhaps teaching literature someday. His had been grander, escaping Maplewood, making enough money that his mother would never have to worry again, becoming someone important. They had both achieved what they'd wanted, he realized. But sitting on the bench overlooking the pond, he wondered if Harper's simpler dreams had brought her more satisfaction than his ambitious ones had brought him. The afternoon slipped away as he wandered the town, memories surfacing with each familiar landmark. The ice cream shop where he'd had his first job, the high school football field where he and Harper had snuck in one night to watch a meteor shower. The public library where they'd studied together, Harper always patient with his frustration over subjects that didn't come easily to him. By the time he returned home, it was after 5, and he felt strangely nervous about his dinner with Harper. He showered and changed into dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt, remembering her instruction about the suit. "You look handsome," Martha observed as he came downstairs. "Very approachable. As opposed to the CEO who arrived in that fancy car looking like he might break if someone hugged him too hard," she said bluntly. Yates laughed despite himself. "I've missed your honesty, Mom." "Well, you can have a regular dose of it if you'd visit more often," she replied, smoothing his collar. "Now, go have a nice time with Harper, and try to remember that not everything valuable can be measured in dollars." The advice followed him as he drove to Main Street, parking in front of Bookmark Books just before 7. The store was closed, but through the glass door, he could see Harper moving around inside, locking something in a small safe behind the counter. She looked up at his knock, her face brightening as she came to let him in. "Right on time," she said, appraising his outfit with approval. "You clean up nicely, Norwood." "You're not so bad yourself, Ross." And she wasn't. Her hair fell in soft waves, and she wore a simple blue dress with a cardigan, looking effortlessly elegant. "Let me just grab my bag, and we can go." She disappeared into a back room, returning with a small purse. "I thought we'd go to Riverside. Remember it? The old mill that got converted into a restaurant." Yates recalled the building, a historic landmark on the edge of town. "It was just opening when I left." "Well, now it's the best restaurant in Maplewood, which I know isn't saying much by your standards, but the food is genuinely good." "Lead the way," he said, holding the door for her as she locked up. The drive to Riverside was short, filled with comfortable small talk about the town and his mother's party. The restaurant itself was charming, with exposed brick walls and large windows overlooking the river. They were seated at a corner table, the early evening light casting a warm glow over the rustic interior. "So," Harper said after they had ordered, "now that we're alone, tell me the truth. How do you really feel being back in Maplewood?" Yates considered deflecting, but found himself wanting to be honest with her. "It's strange," he admitted. "Like wearing clothes that used to fit but don't anymore. Familiar but uncomfortable." Harper nodded. "I can see that. You outgrew this place a long time ago." "Did I? Or did I just run away from it?" The question surprised him as much as it did her. "Maybe both," she suggested. "You always had bigger dreams than Maplewood could contain. There's nothing wrong with that." "But there was something wrong with how I left," he said, finally addressing the elephant in the room. "With what I did to you." Harper's fingers traced the stem of her wine glass. "We were 18, Yates. You got a full scholarship to MIT. I was going to state college. Long-distance relationships at that age rarely work out. But I didn't even try. I didn't even talk to you about it." He leaned forward. "We were best friends for our entire lives, and I just disappeared." "Yes, you did." Her directness was refreshing and painful at once. "And it hurt. A lot." for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I don't have a good explanation, except that I was scared." "Of what?" "Of not being good enough, of failing, of being pulled back here before I could prove myself." He met her gaze. "Of how much I cared about you." The admission hung between them as their food arrived. They both retreated into safer topics while they ate Harper's bookstore, Yates's travel experiences, mutual acquaintances from high school. But the conversation had shifted something between them, an honesty that made everything else feel more genuine. "Remember when we used to dream about traveling together?" Harper asked over dessert. "You were going to take me to Paris." "The Eiffel Tower at sunset," Yates remembered with a smile. "And you were going to show me all the literary landmarks. Hemingway's haunts, Shakespeare and Company bookstore," she nodded. "Did you ever make it to Paris?" "Many times, for business mostly." He realized suddenly how empty those trips had been, luxury hotels and conference rooms that could have been anywhere in the world. "I never saw Shakespeare and Company." "Next time," Harper said lightly, then looked embarrassed, as if she'd presumed too much. "Next time," Yates agreed, surprising himself with how much he meant it. After dinner, neither of them seemed ready for the evening to end. They walked along the riverside path, the air cool and fragrant with wildflowers. "You never answered my question," Harper said suddenly, "from last night, about whether it's worth it the price you pay for success." Yates was silent for a long moment, considering. "A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation," he finally replied. "Now, I'm not so sure." "What's changed?" "Coming back here, seeing my mother, seeing you." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've built this enormous life that somehow feels empty in all the places that matter." Harper's eyes were soft in the gathering darkness. "It's not too late to fill those places, you know." "Even after 15 years?" he asked quietly. "Time is funny that way," she said. "Sometimes it changes everything. Sometimes it changes nothing at all." They stood there looking at each other, the weight of their shared past and separate presence hovering between them. Yates found himself wanting to kiss her with an intensity that surprised him, but he held back, uncertain if he had the right. The moment passed as a group of teenagers came laughing down the path, forcing them to step aside. By unspoken agreement, they headed back to the car. The drive to Harper's apartment was filled with a charged silence. When they arrived, Yates walked her to the door at the side of the bookstore that led to her upstairs apartment. "Thank you for tonight," he said, suddenly feeling like an awkward teenager again. "I'd like to see you again, before I leave." Harper studied him, her expression thoughtful. "I'd like that too. But Yates, I need to know what this is, because in 12 days, you'll be gone again, back to your empire and your important life, and I'll still be here." "I don't know what this is," he admitted. "I just know that being with you tonight made me happier than I've been in years." She smiled, a hint of sadness in it. "That's a good start, I suppose." She reached up and placed a soft kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Yates." He watched her disappear inside before returning to his car, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and possibility. The next few days fell into a pattern, mornings with his mother, afternoons catching up on work, evenings with Harper. They explored their old haunts, the diner where they'd spent countless hours studying, the movie theater where they'd seen their first R-rated film by sneaking in the back exit, the hilltop overlooking town where they'd watched fireworks every 4th of July. Each day, Yates felt the walls he'd built around his past crumbling a little more. Each evening with Harper, he found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone in years about the crushing pressure of running Nortec, about the loneliness of success, about his fears of failure that still haunted him, despite all he'd achieved. "You have imposter syndrome," Harper diagnosed one evening as they sat on a blanket in his mother's backyard, stargazing like they had as teenagers. "Despite being legitimately brilliant and successful, you're constantly afraid someone will discover you're a fraud. Is that what it's called?" Yates laughed, but there was relief in being understood. "I always just thought I was paranoid." "It's common, especially among people from backgrounds like yours who achieve significant success," Harper said. "You don't believe you deserve it." "Do you ever feel that way about the bookstore?" Harper considered this. "Sometimes, especially when the finances get tight or when I compare myself to bigger stores in the city. But then I remember why I do it for the kids who find their first favorite book, for the elderly readers who have a place to discuss ideas, for the community we've built." She smiled at him. "Success isn't just about numbers. Yates says the literature major to the tech CEO," he teased, but her words resonated. When was the last time he'd felt genuine satisfaction from his work, beyond the metrics of growth and profit? On the fifth day, Yates received an urgent call from his executive team, a potential security breach in their new software. He spent the entire day locked in his childhood bedroom on video conferences, emerging only when Harper arrived for their planned dinner. "We can reschedule," she offered, seeing the stress on his face. "No," he said firmly. "They can handle it for a few hours. I'm here, with you now." It was a small decision, but it felt significant, choosing the present moment over the constant demands of his company. The relief on his mother's face when he put his phone away for dinner told him it was the right choice. That night, after walking Harper home, Yates found himself lingering on her doorstep, reluctant to leave. "I keep waiting for it to get awkward," he admitted, "for us to run out of things to say." "Maybe we've stored up 15 years of conversation," Harper suggested with a smile. "Maybe." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his hand lingering on her cheek. "Or maybe some connections don't break, even when you try to sever them." Harper's eyes met his, vulnerable and questioning. "Yates." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, years of unspoken feelings rushing to the surface. Her arms wound around his neck as he pulled her closer, everything else fading away except the feel of her against him, the taste of her mouth, the rightness of it all. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harper rested her forehead against his. "That was 15 years overdue," Yates finished for her, his voice rough. She laughed, the sound warming him from the inside out. "Worth the wait, though." "Definitely." He brushed his lips against hers again, lighter this time. "I should go before I can't make myself leave." Harper nodded, though her hands still gripped his shirt. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he promised. Driving home, Yates felt more alive than he had in years, perhaps ever. The sensation was intoxicating and terrifying all at once because, in a week, he'd have to leave again. Return to California, to Nortec, to the life he'd built. But for the first time, that life felt less like an achievement and more like a constraint. The next morning, Yates called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the remainder of his stay in Maplewood. It was unprecedented. He hadn't taken a true vacation in 8 years, but surprisingly easy. His team could handle things. The world wouldn't end if he was unavailable for a week. He spent the day helping Harper at the bookstore, watching with growing admiration as she ran story time for local children, advised customers on reading choices, and managed the business side with quiet efficiency. The store itself was a reflection of Harper, warm, inviting, and filled with unexpected treasures. "You're good at this," he told her as they closed up that evening. "Really good." "It's not building a tech empire," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "No, it's harder in some ways. You're building a community." He gestured to the wall of photographs, showing book club meetings, author events, children reading in the cozy corners. "You're making a difference in people's lives, every day." Harper looked at him curiously. "You make it sound like what you do doesn't matter." "It matters to the market, to investors, to the thousands of businesses that use our software." He shrugged. "But does it matter in the ways that count?" "I'm not sure anymore." That night they had dinner with his mother, the three of them falling into easy conversation that stretched late into the evening. Watching Harper and Martha together, their genuine affection obvious, Yates felt a pang of regret for all the years he'd missed, and a growing certainty that he didn't want to miss any more. Later, walking Harper home, he couldn't keep the question inside any longer. "What happens when I leave, Harper?" She slowed her pace. "I don't know. What do you want to happen?" "I don't want this to end," he said simply. "But my life is in California, my company, my responsibilities. And my life is here," Harper finished for him. "The bookstore, the community programs, my home. They reached her door, the question unresolved between them. This time when they kissed goodnight, there was a hint of desperation, a knowledge that their time was running out. The days that followed were bittersweet, filled with moments of joy shadowed by the approaching farewell. They made the most of each one: a picnic by the lake, dinner at every restaurant in town, long walks where they talked about everything and nothing, and each night, their goodbyes grew longer, their kisses deeper, neither wanting to let go. 4 days before Yates was scheduled to leave, a summer storm hit Maplewood, rain pounding against the windows of Harper's apartment, where they'd retreated after getting caught in the downpour. They sat on her couch, mugs of hot chocolate in hand, watching the lightning illuminate the dark sky. "I used to be terrified of storms," Yates recalled. "Remember how you'd call me during bad ones?" Harper nodded, smiling at the memory. "I'd read to you over the phone until you fell asleep." "The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn," Yates said. "Your favorite. I can't believe you remember that." "I remember everything about you, Harper." He set his mug down, turning to face her fully. "That's what scares me. I've spent 15 years trying to forget, and in just over a week, you've made it impossible to imagine life without you again." Harper's eyes filled with emotion. "So, what are we going to do about it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Long-distance relationships are hard. We'd be on opposite coasts." "Yes. And neither of us can just uproot our lives. You have the bookstore, I have Nortec." "Yes," Harper said again, quieter this time. The rain continued to fall, filling the silence between them. Yates looked around Harper's apartment, the walls lined with bookshelves, the comfortable furniture, the framed photos of her with friends and community members. This was her life, as real and important as his was to him. "We could try," he finally said. "Visits, video calls, text messages. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing," Harper suggested, a hint of challenge in her voice. "It's a start," Yates corrected her, "until we figure out something better." She studied him, seeming to search for something in his expression. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she leaned forward and kissed him. A kiss that quickly escalated into something more urgent, more demanding. They made love for the first time that night, the storm raging outside as they discovered each other anew. It was both familiar and strange, the comfort of old friendship mixed with the excitement of new passion. Afterward, lying in Harper's bed with her curled against his side, Yates felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. "Stay," Harper murmured sleepily. "All night," he promised, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But they both knew the larger question remained unanswered. The next morning, Yates woke before Harper, watching the soft light play across her sleeping face. She looked younger in sleep, more like the girl he'd left behind. The thought tightened something in his chest. He slipped out of bed carefully, finding his phone where he'd abandoned it the night before. 27 emails, 5 missed calls, 3 text messages, the usual. He was scrolling through them in Harper's small kitchen when a notification caught his eye, a business news alert about Nortec stock dropping on rumors of the security breach. The article mentioned investor concern about his extended absence, reality intruding on the idyll he'd been living in. Harper appeared in the doorway, wearing his shirt from the previous day, her hair tousled from sleep and their lovemaking. "Work calling?" she asked, noting the phone in his hand. "Always," he said, setting it aside and pulling her into his arms. "But it can wait." They spent the day together, helping Martha with some yard work before having dinner at the diner, deliberately keeping the conversation light. But that night, as they lay together in Harper's bed, the unspoken deadline hung over them. 3 more days, Harper said quietly, her head on his chest. "I could extend my trip," Yates offered, though they both knew it was a temporary solution at best. "And then what? Another extension, and another?" She propped herself up to look at him. "We need to be realistic, Yates." "Realistic," he repeated, the word tasting bitter. "Reality is that I run a company with 5,000 employees who depend on me. Reality is that you have a bookstore and community programs that need you here. Yes? Reality is also that I love you," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. "I think I always have." Harper's eyes widened. "Yates." "You don't have to say it back," he said quickly. "It's not fair of me to drop that on you right before I leave, but it's true, and I needed you to know. I love you too, she said simply. That's never been our problem. He pulled her closer, wishing he could freeze time, keep them in this moment indefinitely. But morning came, as it always did, and with it, the countdown continued. 2 days left. Yates spent that day on calls with his executive team, the security issue requiring more of his attention than he'd hoped. Harper understood, working at the bookstore while he commandeered a corner table with his laptop. He watched her as he talked through technical details with his CTO, struck by the contrast between his world and hers, and by how much more appealing hers seemed right now. That evening, they had dinner with Martha again, the conversation deliberately avoiding Yates's imminent departure until his mother addressed it directly over dessert. "So, have you two figured out what happens after tomorrow?" she asked, looking between them expectantly. "Mom," Yates warned. "What? It's a reasonable question," Martha insisted. "You've been attached at the hip for nearly 2 weeks, and tomorrow you're flying back to California. I'm just wondering if there's a plan." Harper gave Martha a gentle smile. "We're working on it." "Well, work faster," Martha advised. "Life's too short for second chances to be wasted." Later, walking under a clear night sky, Yates considered his mother's words. "She's right, you know," he said to Harper, "about wasting second chances." "We're not wasting anything," Harper replied. "We're just figuring things out." They reached the park, finding themselves on the same bench by the pond where they'd spent so much of their youth. The full moon reflected on the water's surface, creating a path of silver light. "What if I moved Nortech's headquarters?" Yates asked suddenly. Harper looked at him in surprise. "What?" "To Boston, maybe, or New York, somewhere closer." "You would do that?" "For the right reason." He took her hand. "For you." Harper was quiet for a long moment. "That's still a 5-hour drive minimum, and you'd uproot your entire company." "It would be complicated," he admitted, "but possible." "What about opening an East Coast office instead?" Harper suggested. "You could split your time." Yates considered this. "That might actually work. We've been talking about expansion anyway. And I could look at opening a second bookstore location, eventually, somewhere near wherever you end up." They were problem-solving together, the way they always had as kids finding a path forward where there seemed to be none. For the first time since his return to Maplewood, Yates felt truly hopeful about the future. The next day, his last full day in town, Yates woke with a sense of purpose. He spent the morning on calls with his real estate team and executives, discussing the possibility of an East Coast expansion in serious terms. By lunchtime, he had preliminary approval from his board to explore locations in Boston, where Nortech already had several major clients. He met Harper at the bookstore, unable to contain his excitement as he shared the news. "It's not a perfect solution," he acknowledged. "I'd still be traveling a lot, splitting my time, but it's a start." Harper's smile was radiant. "It's a very good start." They spent the afternoon visiting their favorite places around town. One last time, the high school track where they had trained for a charity 5K together, the community center where they'd volunteered as tutors, the spot by the river where they'd had their first real conversation after his return. That evening, Harper joined Yates and Martha for a farewell dinner at home, the mood bittersweet but hopeful. Martha, upon hearing their tentative plans, was cautiously optimistic. "Boston's still a long way from Maplewood," she pointed out. "It's a lot closer than San Francisco," Yates replied, "and you could visit both of us." "Both of you together," Martha clarified, looking pleased. "I like the sound of that." After dinner, Yates and Harper escaped to the backyard, sitting on the old porch swing as night fell around them. "I can't believe I'm leaving tomorrow," Yates said, his arm around Harper's shoulders. "I can't believe you came back at all," she replied, "or that we ended up here. Here being, in love, making plans, trying to bridge the gap between your world and mine." Yates pulled her closer. "My world was empty without you in it. I just didn't let myself acknowledge it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently as they rocked back and forth. Fireflies appeared in the yard, their soft lights blinking like distant stars brought close. "Come to California with me," Yates said suddenly. "Just for a visit. See my life there while I work on bringing part of it here." Harper looked up at him, surprise in her eyes. When? Soon? A month from now, maybe? I'll send you a ticket. You can see San Francisco, tour Nortec, meet my friends, he grinned. Though fair warning, I don't have many. Mostly just colleagues. I'd like that, Harper said softly. And you'll come back here, before Boston? As often as I can, he promised. Monthly at least, more if possible. The plans were taking shape, a bridge between their separate lives that might, eventually, become something more permanent. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. They stayed on the swing until well past midnight, talking about the future, making promises, sealing them with kisses that held both passion and commitment. When they finally said goodnight, it wasn't a goodbye, just a pause, a breath between one chapter and the next. The morning of Yates's departure dawned clear and bright, as if Maplewood itself were bidding him a cheerful farewell. Harper arrived at Martha's house early, helping with breakfast while Yates finished packing. "Take care of my boy," Martha said quietly as they arranged pancakes on a platter. "He pretends to be so strong and independent, but he needs someone to remind him what matters." "I will," Harper promised, "though he might need to remind me sometimes, too." Martha patted her hand. "That's how it works, dear. That's partnership." Breakfast was a cheerful affair, all three of them making an effort to focus on the plans they'd made rather than the separation ahead. Yates's flight wasn't until afternoon, giving them a few more precious hours together. After helping Martha clean up, Yates and Harper went for one last walk through town, their fingers intertwined as they strolled down Main Street. They stopped at Bookmark Books, where Harper gave him a small package. "Something for the flight," she explained as he unwrapped it to find a leather-bound edition of The Great Gatsby. "I remembered it was your favorite in high school." "You wrote notes in the margins," he observed, flipping through pages covered in Harper's neat handwriting. "Things I thought about while reading it over the years," she said, a hint of shyness in her voice. "Mostly about you, actually." Yates pulled her close, kissing her deeply, unconcerned about the passers-by who might see them through the bookstore window. "I love you," he said against her lips. "These 2 weeks have changed everything for me." "For me, too," Harper replied, her arms around his neck. "And it's only the beginning." All too soon, it was time to drive to the airport. Martha insisted on coming along, the three of them making the hour-long trip mostly in comfortable conversation, deliberately avoiding the looming farewell. At the security checkpoint, Martha hugged him first. "Don't be a stranger," she said firmly. "And I expect you to make good on all these plans I've been hearing about." "I will, Mom. I promise." Yates held her tight, wondering when she'd gotten so small. "I'll be back before you know it." Then it was Harper's turn, and as she stepped into his arms, Yates felt a surge of certainty unlike anything he'd experienced in his professional life. This her was what he wanted, what he needed. What made everything else worthwhile. "This isn't goodbye," he told her, his forehead against hers. "It's just see you soon." "Very soon," Harper agreed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Call me when you land." "And every day after that," he promised. Their final kiss was gentle, filled with promise rather than desperation. When they finally parted, Yates felt not the tearing away he'd feared, but a stretching a connection that would hold across miles and time zones. As he walked through security, turning back for one last wave, he saw them standing together, his mother and the woman he loved. The past he'd tried to escape, and the future he now embraced. Both waving, both smiling through tears, both believing in the path ahead. On the plane, Yates opened Harper's gift, reading her notes in the margins of Gatsby's story. Some were literary observations, others personal memories, all of them revealing her heart and mind in ways that made him feel closer to her, despite the growing physical distance. On the final page, she'd written something that made his breath catch. Some people spend their lives searching for what they already had. Others are lucky enough to find their way back. Welcome home, Yates. Home. Not Maplewood itself, but wherever she was. The understanding settled deep in his chest as the plane lifted off, carrying him back to California, not away from home, but towards building a new one that would include both the success he'd achieved and the love he'd rediscovered. 3 months later, Yates stood in the newly leased offices in downtown Boston, watching as the Nortec logo was installed on the wall of the reception area. The space was modern and impressive, with views of the harbor and room for up to 100 employees. His phone buzzed with a text from Harper, just past the Welcome to Boston sign. ETA 20 minutes. Yates smiled, typing back a quick reply before returning his attention to the installation. This office represented more than just an East Coast expansion for Nortec. It was the physical manifestation of his commitment to bridging the gap between his world and Harper's. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of planning, traveling, and juggling responsibilities. He'd visited Maplewood twice a month, and Harper had spent 2 weeks in San Francisco, experiencing his life there firsthand. They'd talk daily, weathering the challenges of distance with determination and humor, and through it all, something unexpected had happened. Yates had found a new balance in his professional life, delegating more, trusting his team, and creating space for what truly mattered. Nortec hadn't suffered. If anything, the company was stronger for having a CEO who finally understood that success wasn't measured solely in market share or quarterly reports. When Harper arrived at the office, she looked around with wide eyes, taking in the scope of what Yates had created. "This is incredible," she said, turning to embrace him. "You did all this in 3 months?" "We did this," he corrected her. "I wouldn't be here without you." They toured the space together, Yates explaining his vision for the Boston branch, which would focus on client relations and new product development. "I'll split my time between here and California," he explained. "Week on, week off to start. Eventually more time here than there, as the team gets established. And Maplewood is only an hour away," Harper noted with a smile. "We could even look for a place halfway between." "Actually," Yates said, taking her hand, "I was thinking of something else." He led her to a large corner office with windows on 2 sides. "This is mine, obviously," he explained, then gestured to the connected smaller office. "And I thought that could be yours." Harper looked confused. "Mine? But I have the bookstore." "What if Bookmark Books had a Boston location?" Yates suggested. "This building has a retail space on the ground floor that's still available. You could expand, bring your community programs to a new city." Harper's eyes widened as she considered the possibility. "That's a big step." "Huge," Yates agreed. "And I'm not suggesting you close the Maplewood store. You could hire a manager, split your time like I'm doing, or whatever makes sense for you." He squeezed her hand. "The point is, I don't want to just fit our lives together around the edges. I want to build something new, together." Harper was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the Boston skyline. "I've been thinking about expansion for a while," she finally admitted. "The programs have been so successful, and I've had requests to bring them to other communities." She turned to him, excitement building in her eyes. "A Boston location could be amazing." "Is that a yes?" Yates asked, hope rising in his chest. "It's a, let's seriously explore this," Harper replied pragmatically, but her smile gave her away. "I'd need to run numbers, look at the space, talk to my staff." "Of course. No pressure, no rush." Yates pulled her into his arms. "We have time to figure it out." "We do," Harper agreed, resting her head against his chest. "Something I never thought I'd say about us." Later that evening, over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the harbor, Yates presented Harper with a small box. "We're celebrating," he explained as she looked at it curiously. "The Boston office, your potential expansion, us finding our way back to each other." Harper opened the box to find a delicate silver key on a chain. "What's this for?" she asked. "It's symbolic, mostly," Yates admitted. "Though it is the actual key to my new apartment here in Boston." He took a deep breath. "I know we're still figuring out the logistics of everything, but I wanted you to know that wherever I am, Boston, San Francisco, anywhere my home is open to you. Always." Harper's eyes filled with tears as she lifted the necklace. "Put it on for me?" Yates moved to her side of the table, fastening the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. When he returned to his seat, Harper reached across the table for his hand. "You know," she said thoughtfully, 15 years ago, I thought you broke my heart when you left. But looking back, I think we were just unfinished." "Unfinished," Yates repeated, liking the word. "Not broken, just paused." "And now we get to see how the story continues," Harper said, with a smile that promised everything. As the sun set over Boston Harbor, casting golden light across the water, Yates felt a certainty that had eluded him, even at the height of his professional success. The path ahead wouldn't be simple or without challenges, but it would be shared every step, every decision, every moment building towards a future neither of them could have imagined when he first drove back into Maplewood. His childhood friend had indeed stolen his heart, but in return, she'd given him something far more valuable, a life defined not just by achievement, but by love. And that, Yates realized, was the true measure of success he'd been searching for all along.